All right, welcome to America This Week. That sound you hear.
I just warned Matt that he had taken a bite of a quarter pounder so large that I estimated it would take him 38 seconds to swallow.
I got there in half the time.
Yeah, but it still wasn't enough.
It wasn't enough. It's true. And I didn't get to finish it. So I'm going to be looking longingly in that direction.
You can ask me an introductory question that will cover all of your digestive needs.
No. Walter, I am a media professional. I can swear off a quarter pounder for the
Try it next time Megyn Kelly has us on and see how professional you really are.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I'll bring a toothpick to make sure that nothing interferes with the quality of the broadcast. So, I know there's lots of important things that happen this week, but
we'll get to them. But let's have a little suspense because everybody out there thinks there's one thing that is all important, and we won't let you know which we feel are important until we've covered the most important thing, which is the Trump Pope meme.
I guess we have to lead off with this. So, okay. Donald Trump posted a meme on Truth Social. Let's just look at the Truth Social post. Like he posted this.
Right. It had to happen sometime if you think about it logically in terms of the cultural progression of the Trump social media accounts. That it happened now, leaving him so little room to run, is kind of interesting.
It's a little bit like the six chimpanzees and Shakespeare and typing Hamlet and all that. Like, this was inevitable. It was a lot more inevitable than that, though.
But I guess the fact that there would be an interregnum between popes wasn't inevitable, and he had to strike while the iron was hot.
That's true. He absolutely did. Yeah. So he actually posted this, and I mean, we got to go deep into the motivations of this. But before we do that, we got to talk about the coverage.
Right.
So MSNBC did like a whole segment on it, on the insult to the teachings of Jesus and everything.
Forcing MSNBC to defend Christianity and especially the Vatican was first brilliant move, right?
I guess so. I mean, I find this funny in every direction. Like I feel like, but let's listen to. I think it's Cornell Belcher is the analyst they bring on.
All analysts on MSNBC should be called Cornell Belcher.
That's right. It should just be Cornell Belcher 1, Cornell Belcher 2,
and
right?
Princeton,
all the way up to
Princeton Farter would be another one. Dr. Princeton Farter.
Dr. Princeton Farter. We're welcome now by Dr. Princeton Farter. Shit, it just writes itself.
Okay.
I'm sorry, folks. We're having too much fun with this. Okay, let's watch and see what Cornell Belcher has to say in this interview.
Thinks it is really cute to pretend that he could be the next pope. So much so, he posted this AI image of himself as the pontiff, and doing it while the Vatican and the Catholic world are still in mourning. It is a move that any other politician or public figure would be vilified for. The Catholic bishops of New York State were not amused, saying, quote, "There is nothing clever or funny about this image, Mr. President. Do not mock us." The president was asked about the post at the White House earlier.
I had nothing to do with it. Somebody made up a picture of me dressed like the Pope, and they put it out on the internet. That's not me that did it. I have no idea where it came from. Somebody did it in fun. It's fine. Have to have a little fun.
A little fun. Again, any other public figure, politician would be vilified. The whole episode seems like another, though, in a long line of would-be contradictions or offenses that his religious supporters shrug off. Joining us now, New York Times columnist David French, and back with us, Doug Heye and Cornell Belcher. So, David, you're writing about the Christian right. I know that that's not Catholics, but you do have a line in here that I think is, will help explain what's happening. And you say this, another way of putting it is that the religious right has divorced itself from historical Christian theology, but still holds its partisan beliefs with religious intensity. The religious fervor is there, Christian virtues are not. Explain.
Yeah. Well, what you're seeing in the religious right supporting Trump is, where are you finding Christian virtues in the Trump movement right now? Where are you finding them? How do you see them? They're not there. They're just not there. But what is there is he's giving access to an awful lot of Christian conservative figures. And so they get access. They get to be in the room where it happens.
What David
so they're
French
close
is
to
wearing.
power, and they love
What he's
it.
wearing?
But they're not advancing any kind of Christian
I think he should
theology.
zip
They're
it
not
down
advancing
1
any sort of
inch.
Christian worldview. And this Pope situation is really indicative of what we're dealing with. We're dealing with nothing that's actual respectful to Catholicism at all. He's just playing around with it. He's joking with it.
So what do they believe?
Well,
what is the fervor?
The fervor is very anti-left. There's no question about this. This is where the tech right and the barstool right and the Christian right all join. They're very anti-left. But if you look at the historic positions of the Christian conservative movement, placing a high value on the pro-life movement, yet Trump had the most watered-down platform in generations. Placing a high value in personal character.
That's not what they used to
Read what
say.
Baptist said about character and politicians in the
I thought
Clinton
Roe
era.
v. Wade was his fault.
And all of that is just
Yeah.
gone. It is now gone, and it's about power, and it's about opposing the left.
So it reminds me of the book that Tim Alberta wrote, trying to explain what happened to his church in an era of Trump. And
it goes on. He goes on to say,
he turned them all into church ladies in one fell stroke. MSNBC, where atheists explain what Catholics should be offended about.
and there was obviously a somber New York Times story about it.
Right.
Trump denies posting image of himself as Pope, laughing off critics. And then there's the whole subhead about how he can't take a joke. Yeah. Yes, Walter.
Imagine if you woke up every day with the power to steal 30 inches of newsprint from the New York Times, 15 minutes of time of primetime MSNBC, and a half hour of peaceful being from 50% of America merely by tweeting. It would be irresistible to use that power, not use that power before 7 a.m. every day. And yet they continue to go for it.
Yeah, it is a little bit like squid fishing, right? Where you just keep yanking one after another. I mean,
he can say, how shall I program the news tonight? How shall I program the editorial pages of America? And how about the 7 o'clock conversations for the people who have just finished, All Things Considered and are having their first cocktail? How shall I dominate their lives? I can do it with an AI tweet. Oh, come on. Let's see. Yep, it worked.
So Walter, I'm with you. That's what I would do if I were president. I mean, I would probably do stuff like this. I think past a certain point, if I got elected, I guess if I had gone through what Trump went through in the interim, like with all the prosecutions and everything, and reached the stage of not giving a fuck that he's probably in, I would do it all day long. But I'm not sure that that's like a good thing for the president to be doing that.
But
I find it immensely funny. So yeah.
So there was an Italian Renaissance thinker and counselor to very rich Florentine aristocrats named Machiavelli. And he realized something about holding power. Once you get over whether it's a good thing or not, you can really wield it.
This is true, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, this is just that AI Grok 3 edition, because Trump has cracked a certain code, which is that everybody has only so much energy, so much time to talk about Trump. They would devote all of it to, various substantive criticisms if they could. So he basically steals as often as he can their energy, their time, their precious minutes on cable, their
precious bodily fluids,
their precious inches
Mhm.
in the New York Times. And he has calculated that the cost of it to him is nothing compared to the cost of it to them. And they, however, are so addicted to it, and their readers and viewers expect it so, so intensely that it will never stop working. He trolled Canada into electing a prime minister that a lot of them weren't ready to embrace, just by saying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. That might have been an act of self-harm. I'm still up in the air about that. But yes, absolutely. If we can go back to the Times piece for a second, you're right. So he does this, and let's scroll down. I guess there is a paragraph that begins, "But Catholics across the country."
I used to write lines like that at Time
Yes.
magazine, sitting. I would usually be on Adderall. It would be late at night, and I'd be all alone. And I would tell Americans next week what Catholics across the country felt based on 3 stringer reports that had to be from different regions. One guy from Phoenix in a gas station, one person from Toledo, who was at a mall, and one other person.
That's impressive that you even felt it necessary to have 3.
But that was the Time magazine formula, that it was a national newspaper or national magazine because its stringers would send in absolutely copycat and totally useful rigged quotes from 3 different places, all 600 miles away from each other. Catholics across the country, the New York Times, did they have, how can I put it? Did they have their people out? Did they do this through social media? Or are they just so embedded in the Catholic congregations and parishes of America that they knew instantly?
I kind of hope they just mailed it in, because then there's like synergy with Trump's sort of lack of effort too. But anyway, so they write, "But Catholics across the country, including a prominent American cardinal, have suggested the image is offensive, especially as they mourn the death of Pope Francis. Cardinal Timothy M. Dolan of New York, in Rome for the papal conclave, said when asked about the image on Sunday that he hoped it was not the president's doing. Quote, 'I hope he didn't have anything to do with that,' Cardinal Dolan said. Then he called the image a bruta figura, meaning it had made a bad impression." Then they go down again and they get another quote from Trump, and it's Trump doubling down. Not only did he, because above he says that Catholics thought it was funny. Now he says, "Actually, my wife thought it was cute." Trump insisted on Monday in the Oval Office. She said, "Isn't that nice?" And then so they write this whole story about this, and then it snowballs into this other thing. Lindsey Graham, of all people, tweets about this, like approvingly. Can we see the Lindsey Graham tweet?
He can destroy his enemies and his false friends at the same time.
So I was excited to hear that President Trump is open to the idea of being the next pope. This would truly be a dark horse candidate, but I would ask the papal conclave and Catholic faithful to keep an open mind about this possibility! Exclamation point. The first Pope-U.S. president combination has many upsides. Watching for white smoke. And what's that? What is that Roman numeral? I can't even do that. Trump 2208, I guess. Trump 2028. I'm sorry, right? Is that what that is?
Well, Matt, the Trump 2028 was the first move in this direction.
Yes, exactly. That's right. The Trump merch thing. Yeah.
Right. we're now going to have Trump's face as the first alien ambassador to step out of a mothership, and we'll see that, in fact, the people who have been circling our planet surreptitiously and are now sending an ambassador actually are Trump clones who didn't want to reveal themselves for fear of being attacked.
So
how can he go any higher?
Well, I don't know. What does he say in the Fox segment? Let's listen to this quickly. The 17-second thing.
As Pope? I'd like to be Pope. That would be my number one choice. No, I don't know. I have no preference. I must say we have a cardinal that happens to be out of a place called New York who's very good. So we'll see what happens.
So he just complimented Dolan, freezing him in this paradox of having criticized Trump without much of a sense of humor, while Trump sincerely seemingly praises him.
I mean,
this is like a Bruce Lee movie where he uses a mirror on the back of the wall to make his enemies feel that there are like 10 of him.
I mean, I guess so. It's just such an elaborate joke that's really happening.
But Matt, here's the measure of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
See, I found out the moment this happened. You found out more recently and are still laughing about it.
Mm-hmm.
But the night that it happened, it was predicted that it really was the end. It was finally Mueller time. Trump had made the fatal mistake of offending the working class Catholics of America who were responsible for his election. And yet, the wife of Walter Kern, whose family teach in Catholic schools and are as Roman Catholic as it is possible to be outside of Chicago, in Chicago, said she was the one who brought it to me. And don't think this is a wife who agrees with me in any sort of automatic way. Don't think I have that blessing in life. I was like, wow, if she thinks it funny, and she's a Catholic who just went to church like 10 times during Holy Week, who am I to be offended?
Well, okay. Is there room for funny?
But it's already passed over, was going to be my point. In other words, today, there are already fresh outrages. And this, supposedly catastrophic meme overreach is something that you, who is actually watching sports all weekend, have just caught on to, while the rest of America has 7 more memes that they're outraged about since.
Well, right. And we still we still have to go back and deal with the other one, which is the Trump 2028 meme.
We have an outrage backlog.
Yeah, we have an outrage backlog. Can we see? I think I just sent a clip on that. Here we go.
And it's very cool. Isn't that great? Just went up yesterday. Wow. Think Joe Biden would do this? I don't think so.
Dude, that he managed to keep a straight face during that shows dry comic genius. Like, he didn't give it away.
Or he's insane.
Matt,
yeah,
there are various advantages to having proved to your adversaries that you operate outside the boundaries and the rules-based orders and all the other things they use to hamper their influence. Trump is doing a version of mimetic madman theory. Remember when Nixon told Kissinger that if Vietnam believed he'd gone crazy and was, mad enough to drop a nuclear weapon in the Vietnam War, it might intimidate them? Well, this is the mimetic version of that.
Okay, so this isn't real. This is actually it was the Declaration of Independence, but I have seen him talking about the Trump merch and everything.
Oh no, dude,
Yeah.
not, and that was okay. So this viewer just revealed another layer of prowess. He actually was creating a meme
Get it off the
template.
screen, Bo.
In other words, it was meant to be substituted. The Declaration of Independence was meant to be a meme template so people would stick any interesting item behind that curtain. It could be Peanut the squirrel. It could be, a Trump 2028 hat. It's probably already been the Pope portrait. They probably already memed on meme with that by sticking that behind those curtains. As I'm saying, if you want to get into moralistic arguments, you can go on all day long. And Trump knows that. And he wants you to go on all day long because meanwhile, he's doing something else that either he wants to distract you from or, wants you to be unable to swerve from your outrage in order to criticize. In other words, he gave the editors at MSNBC a intractable problem. Do we lead with our, Trump is hurting immigrants and sending them to, prison in Central America, or he dressed up as the Pope in a AI portrait, and he knocked out the other story.
Yeah. Okay. So just so people realize that there is a real issue here, we'll just show. Here's the Guardian story. Okay.
But Matt, we proved that with the New York Times and MSNBC. We can go back to it, but I think everybody realizes there's a real issue for his enemies.
Right.
And even some of his friends.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, well, I mean, even I kind of wonder about this. Like, this makes me a little. It does make me nervous. It's like it's a joke that feels like it's a little bit too far even for me, and I have a pretty sick sense of humor.
So let me acknowledge something.
Mm-hmm.
When in the first 7 hours in the afterburn part of this meme disclosure, I felt the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what? Okay, so I think viewers of this show know I'm pretty good at deconstructing Trumpian actions in a way that doesn't show the usual MSNBC outrage.
Mm-hmm.
But I went like, why did he do something that even I can't quite explain away or, justify from his point of view or whatever? And I thought, because I'm uncomfortable too. And then I found out my wife isn't. And I went, wait a second. There's something about Catholics that I don't understand. They actually have spent their whole life seeing Catholicism joked about, derided, made fun of. And so they have thicker skins in many cases than people who would speak for them.
Yeah. Well, you would have to, I think, after all of this.
But that guy just said that he had let down the right to life, the pro-life side. In other words, they cornered this MSNBC commentator into taking the surrogate point of view of a fervent conservative Trump follower and explaining why Trump has let them down, as though the thing he let them down over is something the guy agrees with. Like, I think we all agree that pro-lifers should be absolutely fundamentalist and zealous in their beliefs, but Trump isn't enough. Like, in other words, he just garbled their signal. And that's what I think, from his point of view, is worth discomfiting even Walter, the literary critic, who can find a reason for every weird fucking thing that anybody does in politics. And that is that he is garbling their signal.
Okay, so there's another thing he's garbling, though, that in the last 3 to 4 days, maybe it's a little earlier, because as you say, I watch too much sports, but Trump and word salad and dementia are starting to appear. as a new theme. He's losing it. He's losing his mind, and it's
John
back.
Fetterman too, by the way.
Yeah, John Fetterman, and I did a little thing on last week. It was actually very funny. The New York Times suggested that part of the evidence that that he was brain damaged and in a mental health crisis was because he had seriously considered voting for Pete Hegseth. That was actually
that was the one flew over the cuckoo's nest case against Fetterman. The reason he should be strapped to a table and reprogrammed.
Yeah, there was a whole thing about how like even his aides are scared to get into a car with him, and he almost voted for Pete Hegseth.
Right.
So there were, it was pretty funny.
But shouldn't Trump's enemies now be absolutely glad that he's showing the signs, supposedly, of the very disease that they just got finished covering up in their guy? In other words, once again, he has prepared himself to garble the signal if you only think 2 moves ahead. Because remember, he just proved by a cognitive test at his checkup at Walter Reed that he has a perfect score on such things, right? And remember what a big deal he made of that?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I expect that he might actually confuse Africa and South America at a press conference in order to show, troubling signs that will preoccupy the press for 2 weeks and cause Johns Hopkins professors and others to come forward, at which point he will lay on the table some evidence about who was using the auto pen under Biden.
Right.
After everyone has agreed that a demented president is the worst fate that can befall a nation.
Yeah, I mean, this is where you would do if I were Trump, I would start doing the Vincent the Chin Gigante act right now, and shake hands with people who aren't there, put my pants on backwards,
walk into the jungle after you've had a press conference and be retrieved by concerned aides.
Right. Yeah.
I hate to be this postmodern and I dare say glib, but at the same time, we are watching how this thing is refracted through the media. So second order effects of Trump gaffes, we have proven, become headline news the next day. Once again, if you have the power to direct the editorial might of the mainstream press in ways that are probably actually pretty clever because you're also holding cards they haven't seen yet. If bad news comes out over the selection of the next pope, or if he had some preview of some expose that is in the works, he then takes all the power that he has liberated around this meme and pushes it in the direction he wants to. Remember, this is a guy who, through being thought crazy, stupid, impulsive, demented, and so on, has learned, unlike the person who really was, to make everything happen on his timeline. He can shave a few points. He obviously decided that he had a few points to shave.
Yeah, well, I mean, doing this stuff, he definitely makes it work for him. It gets him elected, and in part, it's because I'm sure there are very devout Catholics who I'm sure are like me, who are deeply troubled by behaviors, but also just marveling at the sheer comedy of the whole thing, and struggling, weighing on that in their minds.
Let me switch psyches now and go from the Walter Kern you usually know to the earnest Midwesterner who lurks within. Like I said, I too found it, whoa. And then I was forced to examine why I said, whoa. Am I a Catholic? No. Sure. Okay. So I think on behalf of what religious institutions who venerate a person who I don't, that he's committed a sin. Also, is not Christianity about more than graven images and individuals and people? In meaning, did he not activate another group while he offended one? You know, the people who thought it was really funny in my world were evangelicals.
Well, of course, yes. I mean, if you're not Catholic, there's nothing funnier than the Catholic Church, because the church builds these. I mean, I'm an ex-Catholic, right? So
no, you aren't. There are no such things.
There's no such thing.
There are no ex-CIA agents, and there are no ex-Catholics.
But I mean, it's an amazing institution because it builds. It has these gigantic, impressive structures with these horrifying images that are around you, but they're beautifully rendered, and it's absolutely humorless. Laughing is totally forbidden, and then they will bring out a person who wears a hat like a Pope hat that is impossible not to laugh at. Right.
The question is this: does a U.S. president have the right also to be an edgy humorist? Agree or disagree? Because that's what it comes down to finally. I used to live in England, and England's, as if you've watched Monty Python or any British humor, is basically devoted to making fun of religious figures as 80% of its comedy. Life of Brian, etc. Now, that's not allowed to jump the fence into politics, supposedly. But what if you do it and see what happens and find out, wow, it didn't hurt me. Wow, I know now that these things pass in 7 days, but during those 7 days, I've preoccupied my adversary. In other words, if you think of this as almost a military action rather than a political action, it might make sense. But inside, I continue to be like, man, that was stupid.
Yeah, I don't know. And then we get into the whole Elon Musk thing. So Elon has not had a great week. He's being. It looks like they're in the process of replacing him as CEO at Tesla. And then
is that a real story? That was shot down almost immediately.
Well, I mean, it was reported in CNN.
It was reported in the Wall Street Journal, and then it went, around the circle of mutual credentialing, and then various parties came out and said this is absolutely untrue.
Okay, all right. Either way, he's certainly his situation with the government. He is retreating from what they call daily government work, apparently.
Well, they had to do that at some point, right? I mean, he hadn't quit being, rocket to Mars man, head of Tesla, etc. The question is, what was going to be the script of Elon's departure? Well, was it going to be finished my work, after which everybody would say, no, actually Trump hates him? Or was it going to be played out in some public way that would kind of take some of the resentment that he stirred and bleed it off, so that Elon suddenly looks like a guy who's a little bit of a victim of Trump's caprices and etc., and can go back to Tesla and say, it's okay to drive a Tesla again. I too had a fight with Trump.
Maybe, or it's just too super egotistical and also really weird, eccentric people clashing. Let's look at the ceremony. There was a meeting at which they had an awkward goodbye, and I mean this is like the K2 of awkward. This whole thing. He's wearing two hats.
They say I wear a lot of hats, and as you can see, it's true. Even my hat has a hat. The American people voted for secure borders, safe cities, and sensible spending, and that's what they've gotten.
In the first 100 days, as everyone has said, it's more than has been accomplished in any administration before, ever, period. this portends very well for what will happen for the rest of the administration. I think this could be the greatest administration since the founding of the country.
Well, we all want to thank you for your help. You really have sacrificed a lot. Been treated very unfairly.
Well, they do like to run my cars, which is not great. You know, it could be better.
But you have been treated unfairly. But the vast majority of people in this country really respect and appreciate you. And this whole room can say that very strongly. You've really been a tremendous help. You opened up a lot of eyes as to what could be done. And we just want to thank you very much. And, you know, you're invited to stay as long as you want. At some point, I guess he wants to get back home to his cars. And his
Okay. All right.
So Matt,
Yep.
you know, I just don't want to offend everybody all the time, but I do have to say this. Was not the criticism of Elon that he was the real president?
Well, yes, of course.
Is he any longer the real president? Did they not defang the chief criticism of Trump that he was being run around by oligarchs by having Elon, who is always uncomfortable under the best of circumstances and seems self-conscious and
even
nervous.
when he's got the exact right pharmaceutical mix, it's
Right.
still awkward. Yeah.
So I'm only asking people to consider things on two levels. The level that we used to use back in the days of NBC News at 6 p.m. in 1977, and the new multifarious, multi-level gamer style social media world in which at 100 days, which is kind of when you would expect Elon to leave, like you would almost expect the deal was, can you be around for the first 100 days? He leaves in an abashed way that removes completely the previous meme about him actually being Donald Trump's puppet master.
Right.
And now I can't say all these things are intentional. See, that's where people don't understand me. They think that I believe that everything is scripted and was thought in advance. But I do say, does this not solve a problem for both Elon and Donald? Donald isn't run by Elon, clearly. What's MSNBC going to say now that enemy number one, Elon Musk, was treated poorly by Donald Trump?
So I think let's look at number 22 here. I think this is CNBC's commentary, if I'm not mistaken. Nope, it's Ali. Okay, let's hear what he has to say.
Government spending is on hold.
Nothing that is being done. Nothing. It's actually making life better for the American people.
Elon Musk has been a big part of the first 100 days across the 100 days, as you probably noticed. And now we have a special report on one of the most unprecedented parts of all this. The world's richest man reportedly now moving beyond daily government work. That's the plan. I'll explain that in a moment. But he did join the cabinet meeting today in a little bit of a different posture. If you think that body language matters, and in Hollywood and Washington, it certainly often does. Back in February, he was very big, standing over, almost lording over the meeting, bravado. Today, while
that's right,
he was seated. It seemed almost coordinated as the president also made a point of praising Musk while hinting at his departure.
This whole room can say that very strongly. You've really been a tremendous help. You opened up a lot of eyes as to what could be done. And we just want to thank you very much. And, you know, you're invited to stay as long as you want. And at some point, I guess he wants to get back home to his car.
Dude, you know who is really happy?
Rocket science, you can kind of see what's happening. Special.
Let's pause it for a second.
The cabinet, which, you know, Elon Musk in some ways has usurped attention from, if not actual power. So in the background, Trump's cabinet members who have been kind of able to do a lot of positioning out of view are now about to move into the foreground, much as Marco Rubio just has. In other words, the meme of the last week about Trump's adjutants is that Marco Rubio is taking over.
Right.
He's got 17 jobs. Okay, I'm going to give everybody a hint about what we just saw that they will think shows me to be crazy. Do you know what a hat on a hat means?
In football, it's like you're blocking the right person.
Do you know what it means in Hollywood?
No.
That you have so overmade your point that it's ridiculous. So a hat on a hat means like, I'm going to make this serial killer kick his dog before he kills somebody. And
I see.
And they go, that's a hat on a hat. Have him love his dog before he goes out.
Right.
In other words, it is the word for a preposterous exaggeration that is unnecessary. And it signals, because Elon used the phrase, actually used it verbatim, that there is an inside joke going on.
Do you think that Elon is privy to that inside joke?
A hat on a hat is probably, if you watch comedies about Hollywood scriptwriters and so on, the best known note that is given by studio execs. That's a hat on a hat.
He still looked pretty nuts though with two hats on, one of them being Gulf of America and all that.
Dude, he's right. He looked too nuts. He had a hat on a hat.
He looks high, but go ahead. Yeah.
The guy who has been jumping up and down, exposing his stomach when he hits the apogee of his jumps at campaign stops is worried about looking bad. Come on. They got over that hump a long time ago.
That's true. Yeah, no, that train sailed.
Do you know how hard it was for those two to occupy the same space for even 100 fucking days?
Oh, I can only imagine that.
But President Elon, that meme's gone.
Dude,
they committed to that, and now this guy's having to explain and make America feel bad for Elon, or are they claiming triumph that they drove him out?
I don't know, but I gotta say that's the first time I've ever seen Ari Melber look like David Copperfield. Look at that.
Well, the satanic conjurer.
Yeah, exactly.
If he had like elk horns on his head,
right,
and there was a dark Racket News curtain of blood red behind him, we would know that this was the Antichrist.
That's right. He would be the lead suspect in season 1 of True Detective. All right, so that happened. The whole Elon thing happened. Everyone flipped out about it, and there's like a million stories about all the crazy shit that is now happening to America as a consequence of him firing all these people. Like, I learned this morning that America has a newfound vulnerability to the African giant snail, because he's fired so many people from so many different government agencies that invasive species are returning, and I mean, there's just no end to the amount of stuff. Right? Yeah. This was in the sustainability times,
and yet now he's just a modest boy who came to help, and he somehow got pushed out, and he's going back to his car company and just shooting off rockets. I would say, as a scriptwriter myself, that is the optimum exit atmosphere for somebody who doesn't want his cars blown up anymore.
Probably, yeah, and wants the share price to be going in the right direction. And look, his net worth continues to go up. One thing he's good at is monetizing his presence, and good for him.
People are offended that this form of politics the kind that I'm proposing, because even if you believe that was the most poignant, awkward, authentic moment you've ever seen in politics, which was in no way contrived and was absolutely helplessly sincere. Even if you believe all that, you've got to admit that everybody in a week if Elon does leave, will be writing about him completely differently. And now we'll be saying Trump has taken control. In other words, Trump's whole problem was that he was supposedly a dictator, but he proved that a dictator can also be a puppet. That garbled the signal. Now he's gotten rid of the guy who's supposedly controlling him. That garbled it further. You can't write or stay with any stream of criticism of Trump that is going to last when he does things like that. That the giant snail is now maybe going to take over America, much like, a 50s giant insect is really scraping the bottom of the barrel of quaternary effects, ill effects from Elon's cuts.
Yeah.
Now, Newark Airport failing and the air traffic control system of America going down because of the cuts, that's a better drama.
Well, let's hold that for a second, because I want to get to the RFK thing. No, I haven't seen this video yet. You told me that it's an absolutely necessary thing to watch. But RFK, and apparently this is a remarkable piece of video.
This is RFK Jr. announcing what they are calling a ban on gain-of-function research. In other words, mad scientist chimerical combination of viruses. And he gives a 3-minute speech, which, love him, hate him, or, not care about him, is the most concentrated set of conspiracy thinking ever to be articulated in the Oval Office. And I only call it conspiracy thinking because that's what his enemies will call it. From his point of view, he's telling the truth. And I think, in fact, he may be.
Let's hear it.
Good to have you all. Bobby, do you have anything to say? We signed some very important documents having to do with health. Do you have anything to say?
Oh, it's Jay. Look at that.
A gain of function. This is an historic day, the end of gain of function research funding by the federal government and also controls by private corporations on gain of function studies. This was a kind of study that was engaged in by the United States military and intelligence agencies beginning in 1947. By 1969, the CIA said that they had reached nuclear equivalency, that they could kill the entire US population for 29 cents a person. That year, President Nixon went to Fort Detrick and announced a unilateral end to this kind of research, what they call dual-use research, research that was for vaccination and also for military purposes. He then persuaded over 180 countries to sign the Bioweapons Charter in 1973. That basically ended gain-of-function research around the globe until 2002. Or 2001, after the anthrax attacks, we passed the Patriot Act, and the Patriot Act had a provision, a little-known provision in it, that said that although the Bioweapons Charter is still in effect, and the Geneva Convention is still in effect, U.S. federal officials who violate it cannot be prosecuted. And that relaunched a bioweapons arms race, and that was driven by gain-of-function research. In 2014, 3 of those bugs escaped from U.S. labs, and President Obama declared a moratorium on future use, and instead, a lot of that research was moved offshore to the Wuhan lab. We have, and it launched.
Okay, I guess that's that's
so
where it ends.
Have you just digested what he said? He basically, without saying it outright, said Anthony Fauci is a war criminal who contravened the Geneva Convention under a Patriot Act loophole and was stopped in a certain way by Obama, then moved that research to Wuhan, China, where COVID just happened to escape from. He just went back to 1947 and in 3 minutes detailed the intelligence and military effort to, erect a biowarfare deterrent, told us that it was so effective that the CIA determined it could kill everybody in America for 29 cents a piece. Then right after 9/11, slipped into the Patriot Act the ability to start it up again, not in an affirmative way, but in a way that caused bureaucrats not to have to fear prosecution. He brought it right up, we didn't see the end, to COVID. That is the most radical alternative narrative of COVID, the Patriot Act, the skullduggery of the intelligence and military research state that you will ever see. And it took 3 minutes and was a seamless narrative, whether you believe it or not.
Well, I mean, basically, he was synthesizing the conclusions of the Oversight Committee report, or I'm sorry, which committee was it that did that 530-page report last year? But was also the subject of an executive order last week, and in the process there, some kind of case against Anthony Fauci for perjury. Some of those committees, both in the House and the Senate, had dug up a lot of those facts and some of those chronologies. I mean, you mentioned the dual use research. There are notebooks talking about weekly dual use research meetings dating back to 2014, 2015, involving Wuhan. Jeff Sachs, I guess last week, said that he's concluded that Wuhan started in North Carolina with Ralph Barrick.
Yes.
And Rand Paul put out a quasi-cryptic statement about new evidence that they've uncovered tying Fauci to various things.
Remember that RFK Jr. is a lawyer, and a lawyer who often appeared in court. Okay? He's not a doctor. What you just saw was the opening statement in the potential prosecution of United States co-conspirators in the unleashing and the covering up of the COVID virus. It came from the Oval Office. That is the way you speak at the beginning of a jury trial.
I don't see any way that they can deny it at this point. I mean,
who can deny it? Fauci, he's out there denying it constantly.
But the idea that it's not gain of function research, what they were, I mean, they have memos where they're calling it gain of function research.
But he swore in front of Rand Paul's committee under oath that they did not participate in such research.
Well, but
he may get away.
Though. I mean, yeah,
right. But in other words, what I'm saying to you is that you just saw something that even the people who were hoping for COVID truth under Trump never expected. I know a lot of them. They are shocked today. You know why they're shocked? Because they thought this would come much later, or they thought it would come at the beginning. And now they see, no, what's happened is somewhat patiently, the complete narrative has been put together. And after RFK got off, the new America's doctor, Jay Bhattacharya, because we have no other player in that role. Okay. Dr. Fauci's gone. Francis Collins is gone. The former Surgeon General is gone. There is no America's doctor. It's Jay Bhattacharya, the leading COVID critic from Stanford University, now the head of medical research in the United States of America. And he came on after RFK, and he gave the scientific or nerdy version. And I frankly didn't expect it. People say Donald Trump is so proud of, Operation Warp Speed and thinks that, COVID was actually a triumph for him and so on. And he let that narrative, in which he's basically a dupe, who didn't tell America where COVID came from because he didn't know. In other words, you wonder about Trump's downside. He just exposed one of his biggest downsides, which is to his supporters. He got duped, or he didn't tell us the truth.
Right. I mean, I think we should point out, by the way, that you mentioned Jay. Already it's just so incredible the stuff that's happening in this administration that I never thought I would see ever. But a couple of weeks ago, Andrew Lowenthal, with whom I worked on the Twitter files, after the Twitter files, remember we tried to put together that list of agencies that had done anti-disinformation work.
Yes.
And had done contracting on misdis and malinformation. So he eventually left. He started up a nonprofit called LibrNet, and they put together a list of I believe it was I gotta find the right number, but I believe it was 830 here different research grants that were given out starting in 2016 on that. 867 grants out of since 2016 about misinformation. And when you put out the list, the Free Press called up Jay or called up the NIH and started asking about the NIH grants that were related to basically policing misinformation, and they started canceling them. In fact, and that's going on all over government.
Jay Bhattacharya saved the Beagles this week, in case you didn't notice. Bhattacharya, who is now ready for prime time and is appearing on Fox News morning shows regularly, as I say, in the role of America's doctor, America's rational, mild-mannered, truth-telling doctor, said that he got flowers from PETA for freeing scores of beagles from their inhumane, caged, and tampered with miserable existence at the NIH campus.
Well, I mean, I don't know. How are they going to spin that one? They're already spinning the...
They can only counter-program it. They can't spin it. Freeing beagles from Anthony Fauci's unholy laboratories cannot be spun.
Yeah, that's going to be a tough one. But it's just wild to watch all this stuff happening. I mean, look, the deportation stuff, we got to get into it.
Yeah.
But between things like, I don't know, trying to tell the truth about gain of function and stopping these disinformation programs because journalists asked questions about it. It was somebody dug up the research and posed questions, and a victim of censorship, which is who Jay is, decided to terminate those programs. It's just awesome. I mean, we would never have seen this stuff.
But what's good for the goose is good for the gander as far as the Walter Kern unreality critique. And just as I said, I sensed some contrivance in other stories. Jay's job is to come forth as the formerly persecuted guy who was silenced by the scientific establishment, which it turned out wasn't interested in science, but was interested in cover-ups and maybe, money and other things, and see a list of all the programs that actually involved persecuting him personally and say, well, look at this. I'm going to cancel these, and I now have the power. Now, I don't think that is a completely unexpected development that just happened accidentally when somebody found a list.
No, but I mean, it's it's really interesting, and I know that
and I think it's awesome too. But I'm just saying that things can be both awesome or whatever, and to a certain extent premeditated. The minute they nominated Jay to head the research establishment that had actually frozen him out and called him a fringe epidemiologist, you knew this scene was coming.
Oh, of course. He's just so mild-mannered. It would, you knew it wasn't going to come out sounding like vengeance when he finally did it, and it didn't. They just went ahead and quietly terminated those programs.
It's impossible for him to be the kind of cocky jerk that Fauci was.
Right.
I mean, if you want to talk about, a switch of roles or a change of actors, this is as big a 180 as you can pull.
Right. Well, we'll come back to that in a sec. We do have to get to this whole. There's so much stuff to get to. There's basically multiple stories that are developing that are discussing the idea that America has become a pariah state and is no longer functional, or is no longer functional because of the deportation. So you sent me a story about strawberries dying on the vine. If we could take a look at that one just quickly. This is
they've moved on from eggs.
Yeah, so now this is legal. Their legal correspondent, Lisa Rubin, and is basically talking about how we're not going to have strawberries anymore.
Let's hear about it.
If they think it's going to be a trap, won't it create more law breaking, more people living in the shadows?
Absolutely. And I'll give you a good example and one that we haven't really talked about a lot. I'm from Southern California originally, which is the strawberry growing capital of America in Oxnard, California. When I was home last, there were stories about how all of this fruit was dying on the vine. And the reason it was dying was because the farm workers who were picking them were afraid to come out of the shadows. There's no question that the dramatic uptick in law enforcement with respect to immigration is impacting the willingness of people to participate in the economy and to otherwise cooperate with immigration proceedings. You see that also in the case involving this judge in Milwaukee. The gentleman who she is allegedly accused of trying to help escape from the courthouse, he was there for a court hearing with respect to domestic violence charges. If people believe that they will be arrested, for example, in courthouses when they show up to make routine appearances, either in immigration or in criminal proceedings, you're not going to have people show up for things like naturalization interviews or criminal appearances. Either one, you're going to see people.
Okay, stop. Is it not Trump's stated intention to get illegal immigrants to leave the country? Because that's really going into the shadows.
I was just going to say it's an elaborate argument to make that by deporting somebody who's here illegally, they won't be around to stand trial for
domestic violence. So wait, it's most harmed are the women of America who have a right to justice when their husbands beat them. But if their husbands or partners are illegal immigrants, who won't show up for trial, how are they to get justice?
Yeah,
dude, that is so tortured that I couldn't put it into a short story.
And I have a larger problem with this whole thing, which is that there's a lot of describing of stuff that has been has gone on in this country for decades as new, as part of this whole deportations thing. But there's another thing that's happening, which is
also let's remember, audience, that entire sandcastle was erected on this actual journalistic act. Semi-journalistic act. She went home to Oxnard, where she grew up, and heard that strawberries were rotting in the field.
Mm-hmm.
Matt,
right.
does that if a Racket news reporter came to you and said, I went home to somewhere and I heard something and now let's write a story about it, would you say, make a few phone calls?
Maybe, or if I work for the New York Times, maybe I would say Catholics across the country feel like strawberries are dying on the vine. No, it's the, I guess the standards on this stuff are changing. So,
dude, if you go home at any time to a part of the country that you don't live in anymore and hear a rumor that is injurious to Donald Trump, you can now get primetime coverage.
Right. Yes.
Interview a strawberry picker. Go to one of the people in the shadows who doesn't want to be seen and say, did you abandon the strawberry fields out of fear of ICE?
Right. And what are we going to do about that? Well,
she was lying. Strawberries aren't until August.
Because I just don't believe that this is true. The amount of, well, let's come back to that because our mystery producer is about to leave. So I want to.
You know what's tragic about the strawberry story, Matt?
What?
When strawberries die on the vine, they become food for the giant snail, which will explode in population in the Oxnard area, just north of Los Angeles.
Because of all the fire, while we've had an increase in ICE raids, we've had a decrease in other kinds of personnel, and so now we're gonna have more snails.
This is like the strawberries. This is the song "There's a Hole in the Bottom of the Sea," adapted to Trump criticism. And on top of the strawberry, there's a giant snail and and a hole in the bottom of the sea.
And it keeps going and going and going. Okay, so the other thing is America as pariah state. Nobody wants to come here anymore. Everybody thinks we suck. There's no more people aren't visiting. They're not spending money. CBS did a big segment on this. They've done a bunch of them. If we could look, the last thing we could look at, Mr. Producer, is number 12, if you're still there.
This, of course, wasn't a problem during COVID for MSNBC when everybody was scared to come here.
Right.
The beginning of the second Trump administration, we've seen a drop in overseas travelers coming to the U.S. Stats from the International Trade Administration show February saw a decrease of 2.4% compared to the same time last year, but the decline was even more steep in March, 11.6%. Compared year over year. Now, the exact reasons we should clarify are unclear, but February, the first date the president signed his first executive action to impose tariffs against Mexico, Canada, and China. And early March was when the U.S. began detaining green card holders like Mahmoud Khalil. Joining us now from London with more on this is CBS News foreign correspondent Remi Inocencio. Remi, good morning to you. What regions are seeing tourists steer clear of the U.S.? Where are people deciding not to come?
Akron, Ohio.
Pretty much everywhere you look around the world. I'll start here in the UK and Western Europe. And one data point that really boggles my mind is that about 120,000 fewer people from just 3 countries here, the UK, Spain, and Germany, traveled to the US in March versus a year ago. You can see that drop on your screen there for all of Western Europe, down 17%. It was even bigger for the Caribbean, 26%. Africa was less so, but still at 12%. And Eastern Europe and the Middle East, though, they actually saw jumps. These falls, though, most of these falls around the world, turning out to be a massive U-turn on optimism for the U.S. tourism industry. Last December, that forecast was for a growth of nearly something like 9%. It's now forecast to be a drop of more than 9%. And then the ripple effect is in the money, right? The tourism dollars lost for the U.S. economy. Goldman Sachs said that the U.S. could lose out as much as $90 billion. This is from things not booked, from flights not booked, hotels not booked, restaurants and bars not being visited, theme parks not being
Okay, if we could pause
visited.
it, and then let's just skip to the second part of the video where the host asks, is there a single reason?
Own thoughts. He spoke with her own Nancy Cortez earlier. Take a listen.
Why do you think that there are fewer people suddenly who want to travel to the United
Well,
States?
there could be a little, there's a little nationalism there, I guess, perhaps. It's not a big deal.
Do you think some people are scared to come here because they hear the stories of tourists who are detained for a few days or even a week or two?
No, we treat our tourists great. We're the tourism capital of the world. There's no place like this. And there may be a little bit of nationalism, but I doubt it. I actually doubt it.
And you asked if it's not the U.S. where it might be. Frankly, it's where you feel safe, right? Welcome, relaxed, and where you can get more bang for your buck, Errol. Europe appears to be an early winner. Rental properties for the summer surging here. Bermuda in the Caribbean, they say they're getting interest from Canadians. And then further away, my eye is on Japan. It has been actually for the past few months. The yen hasn't been steadily this week since the 1990s.
I think we might have missed it.
Okay, Matt, let me stop you. That last thing he said was absurd.
Mm-hmm.
The Japanese are not coming to America for some reason. Now, Japanese people in general do not emigrate to other countries in large numbers, okay? Check me on that. So I don't think they're afraid of being detained. If Trump is being honest, I think nationalism may be a point here. If you're a super liberal Canadian or Brit, how do you protest these things except by canceling a trip? But again, the numbers coming from the International Travel Association, is that an arm of what? They have yet to be accredited as an institution I've ever heard of. I'm not defending Trump. All I'm saying is that we just went from the stock market was being destroyed. We then experienced in 30 days the quickest recovery from a correction in some long amount of time. When I knew to buy Tesla stock, I'm going to be fully transparent here, was when Tim Waltz got up on the stage and said he got up every day and cheered himself up by watching Tesla stock go down. On that day, it was 225. To me, that was a buy signal. It's around 280 today. That happened in a few weeks. So when travel picks up again, what will be the next destructive second order effect? It is not surprising to me at all that people coming from other countries would either have a political objection or fear when they're told in those countries that they might get hassled.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say. The UK put out an advisory saying that you might be detained.
Could that be a reason?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing we didn't see in that video is that there's a moment where basically he says, "Is there a single cause?" And the guy says, "Well, okay, it comes down to Trump. Basically, all roads lead to Trump. There are many reasons, but they all revolve around one person." And look, there are a number of these stories out there talking about the drop in tourism. And
when the United States issues travel advisories to other countries, I don't know what statistical effect it has. I also don't know when Great Britain does it or the NATO countries that are claiming, fascism has come to America in their state-sponsored media. I don't know what effect that has, but I imagine it has some. They're making it seem like people are opening the newspaper and through some telepathic or just intuitive aversion to America going, honey, we were going to go to San Francisco. Fuck that. Without any role from state media, international press, journalism telling horror stories, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, so there was a Canadian woman who told a story about being detained for some time, and then that was heavily covered in Canada. The whole thing where CBS says, we're not telling you why people aren't coming, but let's just look at the date here, and then it's like circling the date when Mahmoud Khalil, was
right
had his
that was the day when people in the Caribbean picked up their newspapers, okay, the Caribbean that had the 26% drop, and went, okay, no going to the United States. Well, maybe it was, but their failure to account for the reasons is telling, because the reasons are probably pretty easy to put together if the statistics are accurate. Other countries are warning people, telling horror stories. Also, maybe border policy has tightened. The word gets around quickly that going through customs or immigration in America is a little tougher right now. Well, did he not promise that?
It's also tougher going the other way too, though. I'm like, you need a visa to go to England now. Like, what the fuck is up with that, by the way?
See, I was married to a foreign national, so I know something about the legal immigration process in America.
Mhm.
And I can tell you that coming into America, if you have any oddness in your background, is always a dicey proposition, and was in the mid 80s too. A lot of people get put in those interrogation rooms when they come to America under every administration. And now that every single one of those cases can be amplified into a Trump hole at the bottom of the sea style secondary horror effect, you have something that happens constantly that now can be reported on as horror.
Yeah, and so that's kind of the same point I wanted to make about the deportation story. They're making it out. I recognize that some of the policies are new, and that some of the reasoning that they're employing with a very specific niche group of people, like the Mahmoud Khalils, who are being bounced based on an obscure provision of the Immigration and Naturalization Act,
right?
That didn't exist until after 9/11. Apart from that, though, the idea that undocumented people are afraid to go pick strawberries, or are afraid to go to work, or afraid to go make appearances in court, they've always been afraid. I mean, I wrote a whole chapter in a book about this. I spent months in a town in Georgia where they had to invent a special taxi and bicycle service so that people wouldn't get pulled over while they were driving on the way to work. And it was like a version of the Montgomery bus boycott taxi service,
right?
And even then, it was the same thing, where people would be picked up at any time, without the opportunity to see their families again, and they would immediately be shuttled to other detention facilities in other states, and then they would disappear to places. At best, you might have like the human version of a package tracking number to find out where your relative was, but it didn't mean you were going to necessarily see that person again. And other things they're reporting on, that there was a big story in Tennessee a couple of days ago about it was some kind of a basically they were stopping cars and and pulling people over and checking their IDs. This is a program they had that in LA, in the early Obama years. Like I covered a story of a woman whose family lived in a station wagon, who had to like strategically drive around those checkpoints. All of this stuff, like none of it is really new. Even the sheer numbers of deportations are not really higher. They've even openly expressed dissatisfaction with that fact, right? Like Tom Homan has talked about how he's upset that they're not getting a higher number of people.
A lot of Trump supporters whose betrayal by Trump MSNBC is suddenly concerned about, as they were that he's not sufficiently pro-life, even though he promised people. a lot of Trump supporters are disappointed in the in the anti-immigration push. They think it's kind of symbolic. They don't think the numbers are that impressive, and so on. But let me just tell a quick story. I'm not trying to minimize whatever the real effects of Trump's policies are, and I'm not trying to construe them as constructive if people think they're damaging. All I'm asking you to do is, after 9 years or whatever it is of constant coverage and cherry picking, to analyze the basis on which these sweeping statements are being made. But I will tell you this: American immigration policies, even when you go through the process legally, as I did when I married a British woman in 1985, are horrendously difficult and expensive and perilous. In fact, it kind of radicalized me when I had to go down to the federal building in New York City with my would-be British bride and saw people being detained and put in cells that exist right there. You'll be in line with somebody and they will come and grab them out of line and put them in a cell, and the lawyer will be screaming and all kinds of stuff will be happening. And I was like, whoa, nobody told me this even existed. It is a little shocking to see under the hood of how America enforces these laws. And yet it has been shocking for a while.
That's what I mean, Walter. I think what we're getting with some of the Trump stuff is they're just taking stuff that's been there, that stories that have been there to do, but haven't really been done, and suddenly making them out to be mass human rights violations. I mean, there was an amazing moment after Barack Obama got elected. There's a program called 287G, which figures very heavily in all this, which basically deputizes every state, local official, law enforcement type to perform an INS or ICE check on anybody who's in their custody. Right. I even interviewed a fish game and wildlife person. It wasn't a state official. It was a federal official. But if they caught somebody in a park, right, like they could print them.
Matt, I live in the West Montana, 50 miles from Yellowstone National Park, in a part of the country where great amounts of acreage are taken up by federal lands. When you get on federal land, which you may have to drive through in Montana just to take an ordinary trip, like if I want to go south from Livingston, Montana, I have to spend a lot of time in the outskirts of Yellowstone National Park. If I get pulled over there by a park agent, I am suddenly scrutinized for violations of federal law and have a whole different set of penalties for doing things like speeding there and so on than I do 1 mile outside of it. And immigration, I happen to know from stories that I've collected over the years, is one of the sets of laws that they opportunistically enforce when they pull you over in federal areas.
Right, because they can, but they can do that on state territory too now. I mean, they've been able to do it on state territory too since 1996. When Obama got elected, there were a lot of people who thought he was going to ease the program back. He expanded it in 2012. I was at a protest in Austin it had to be like 2014, where people were chanting, "Obama, Obama, don't deport my mama," at that thing. And again, as you say, it's the kind of thing that when you hear about it firsthand from people, it is a little shocking if it's not like part of your daily routine to talk about. But this is a story that's been there. Periodically, the press shows some interest in it, and they'll do stories about ICE raids. But it's not something that's exclusive to Trump. Even the numbers aren't exclusive to Trump. What is different is the rationale that is being used on a small segment of the population, and
my overall thesis as I do this show and our other broadcast, because you're the investigator, you're the guy who goes out and gets the facts. You do the interviews, you get the 2 matching sets of stories that cause you to find something reportable. Walter writes novels, screenplays, talks to his friends, and uses his whole lifelong network to try to determine from that system what's going on and what's true. One of the conclusions I've come to is that we live in the age of narrative. That is, in fact, how governance occurs and how power is accumulated and discharged. Okay. If you can go with me to that point, then maybe you can go with you to this point. In every narrative, you have to choose illuminating moments. And when you do that, you are able to move emotions, you are able to move the mind, and so on. But the materials for the narrative that we're being given at the moment mostly pre-existed Donald Trump, and the spotlight on them is mostly one that could have been shown at other times, but finally their meaning, their interpretation, their gathering force around a assertion that everything's falling apart, the United States is a pariah, our economy is disintegrating. That master narrative is consuming so much evidence, so-called, that one has to question it lest they be swept up in another one of these fucking panics that goes back to Russiagate, or frankly the war on terror, or Iraq, or before that. And my job is to immunize myself and others against the premature acceptance of narratives that are meant to move your decision making in ways that are probably contrary to your interests.
I mean, I think that's right. When I look back at the entire sort of Trump political experience, I made a lot of mistakes simply by being frozen by the sheer quantity of messaging about certain panics, right? So, the Russiagate comes along, and there's just so much stuff about it that it overwhelmed my basic instinct about it, which was, well, where's the beef? Where's the evidence? I kind of timidly said that for a little while. And then it took, a good year or so to realize, okay, this is actually total horseshit, and it's like malicious. And they're dumping us. But for a long time, that quantity of stuff caused me to get it wrong, right? And the same thing happened when he was running for president the first time. You kept being told things over and over again, like that he was unelectable because of X, Y, or Z reason, because of polling reality A, right? And then you would go out and you would see the crowds would be enormous and 5 times the size of Clinton's crowds, and you'd be asked to make, to suspend your disbelief, right, or to suspend your judgment. I think that's what's going on here. It's like you're right. Each one of these stories, we're in an all-time crisis. Oh my God, the stock market's crashing. Well, it's not now, right? I mean, it's back up again to 41.
As I said, there are 2 times when the Trumps have come out and given investment advice to the Americans, the American public. The first time was during the COVID crash. Donald Jr. explicitly said, if you buy stocks right now, you're going to make money rather quickly. It was true. Okay. I actually know multimillionaires who are multimillionaires because they took that advice. They went this is not a structural crash, what they call structural in the investing world. We will recover. It's from a one-time event, which may be serious, but will not last forever. I'm buying, and they made a lot of money. Trump was just recently accused of sort of somehow fomenting an insider trading panic or an insider trading epidemic, which of course can't be insider trading if everybody knows about it.
Right.
When he said this would be a great time to buy stocks and called the bottom of the panic that was being attributed to him.
Yeah.
When you have data points like that, when you have people like Jay Bhattacharya at the head of the very ministry cabinet post that was in charge of his persecution and marginalization, when you've had enough of those turns, when you've got people at the Washington White House Correspondents' Dinner saying, hey, maybe we got this thing about Joe Biden being alert and competent wrong. When you have enough of that, it is incumbent on you to switch filters as far as what you hear. And then when you hear something that's so overwhelmingly self-evident and repeated across the board, it actually becomes evidence for perhaps it being one of these phenomena.
Yeah, and that's what I worry about. I mean, I'm kind of permanently gun shy about Trump manias now, because
but we're supposed to learn from experience as human beings.
Right,
we're not supposed to revert to innocence every 3 months, no matter what happens. Do I love being this way, or did I prefer like the time when Kevin Bacon was starring in Footloose and America was right about everything? And oh my God, look, 9/11, let's go to war against the world, especially that Saddam Hussein. Would I prefer to be back at that moment?
No,
not really, because I got panicked into all sorts of things like the Patriot Act that RFK just described, which I probably should have opposed at 10 times the level I did.
Yeah, I mean, the Patriot Act, I was against it at the time. I was against a lot of that stuff pretty early. And you know, throughout that entire period, whether it was Republicans or Democrats, the continual expansion of this secret state, the use of emergency power, all these things, you know, was deeply troublesome. And I get you do get whiffs of that with some of these Trump policies, like you know, like little portions of them, like the Marco Rubio program, what is it, the search and deport, what are they calling that, where they're using AI to look at your social media stuff, and then but then also using that very small clause that allows the government to make a subjective judgment about whether or not you're espousing or endorsing a terrorist group or a designated terrorist organization, and if you are, you can be removed from the country, which would legalize all these things like the Mahmoud Khalil business. You may not like it, but it would, right? But it makes it.
We should celebrate one principled victory today. Just before the show, it came to my attention that this ridiculous bill that would somehow outlaw anti-Semitic speech or whatever that was withdrawn. Okay, so we don't have to worry about that one, which was
the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act.
Yes, done, over, get out of here.
Yeah, well, that was fucked up.
Yeah, but here's what I'm going to propose as a cumulative statement about everything we've talked about so far. It is important to note that this week a Ukrainian minerals deal was signed, supposedly. Okay. It's important to note that gain of function research was stopped. It's important to note that Real ID became mandatory as of like a couple of days from now in order to fly in America. You know, the things that are actually happening that you're not paying attention to are pretty damn interesting and important. While the strawberries of California rotting in the fields, as someone who grew up on a farm, let me tell you something. One of the things that produce does is rot in the fields for a million reasons, especially fruit that has sugar in it. If you knew the percentage of fruit that actually makes it to the store, onto the truck and to the store, compared to that which reached maturity in the field, you'd be freaking shocked, dude.
No, absolutely. But I think your overall point is just we got to be careful about jumping the gun and falling for any of these panics. And there's just so many signs of the same kind of behavior that would cause you to get things wrong. Like just like, for instance, like when Bountygate happened, when it first came out, I thought, okay, well, it looks like they kind of have that story sort of.
I can't even remember the story clearly now.
That was the one where there was an intelligence report that came from Afghanistan saying that Russians were paying bounties to Afghans to kill Americans in Afghanistan. And it was one of these things that didn't quote anybody by name, but it was multiple sources from different agencies. And it looked like they kind of had that story. And then it just completely fell apart, right? And so you learn to be suspicious of stories that don't have names behind them or that leave out crucial details. Like it's been really bugging me that in this the story about the Tufts student Ramesia Ozturk, who they keep saying that she's been detained and arrested because she wrote an editorial. Now that may be true. It's possible, but the State Department explicitly denied that and said there was more to the story. And it just makes me nervous to see that detail missing in all the coverage. Like, it makes me think I'm being lied to again, right? So that what are we dealing with in that story? You know,
the other thing is that over the last 24 years, let's say, since 9/11, we have had exposed to us the mechanics and the very nature of some of these frauds. In other words, we now have a pretty good idea where COVID came from and how that was distorted and camouflaged and lied about. We now have a pretty good idea how the Russiagate scandal around Trump was engineered by a combination of law enforcement, intelligence, campaign officials, law firms, and so on. We now go all the way back. We now know something about how the weapons of mass destruction panic that was used as the pretext for the Iraq War happened, who did it, and so on. Once you have all that knowledge as a journalist, are you really supposed to go on presuming that big world-shaking events that start wars, pandemics, chase presidents from office, and so on are the fairy tales you believe they were before?
Right. No, obviously not. Yeah.
Yet at the same time, do you want to be Walter Kern? Do you want to be the fall guy who everybody says, that dude is paranoid as hell? He uses this narrative construct template for things that we used to believe are either true or untrue, and he refuses to come down on either side in the traditional positivist, philosophical, pseudo-scientific fashion. It's lonely as hell, dude. This is why I live in a tiny little town of 7,000, because in the middle of New York City, where everybody reads the New York Times every morning and knows Rachel Maddow and is maybe going to see her tonight, I have a hard time fitting in.
Yeah, absolutely. Did we talk about the Ben Smith as Recline thing? I don't think we did. Did we? Did you see it?
I saw you wrote a commentary on it. I am a subscriber to Racket News. I get your stuff at the same time your subscribers do, but you've been unusually prolific lately, and so I've had to do other things. Like maintain a house.
So you got to just watch this. So remember Ben Smith is the guy who published the Steele dossier, and this is his podcast, and he's got Ezra Klein, who's writing that hit, who's everywhere now because he wrote the hit book Abundance. By the way, have you read that book yet?
No. As a rule, the word abundance grates on me ever since it became code for wishing things into existence.
Yeah, there's a lot of wishing things into existence in that book. It's wild. I'd be really curious to read a Walter Kern review of that book, actually. But listen to them sort of casually talking about, yeah, maybe we fucked some shit up with Russiagate. Haha. This made me want to run out into the streets and go on a tri-state killing spree.
Ezra is supposed to be.
It's also a media environment, which at least I felt. I was running BuzzFeed then. That a lot of our readers felt, and a lot of Democrats felt like there's no way this guy was legitimately elected. There are two theories. One, it was Facebook. Two, it was Russia. And lots of media energy went into chasing those two things. The White House felt totally under siege from like that set of questions. I think I have some regrets about that in retrospect. Do you?
Do you regret publishing the dossier? Is that what you're saying? Is that the admission here, Ben?
I would say I'm more ambivalent about it than I used to be.
Oh, we made news on our own podcast.
Would you have regretted it even more if it had caused a war with Russia?
Podcast host, you think I'm not going to see that coming?
I hear Ezra's voice, and I think I'm on his podcast.
I'm a professional here. I was always very hostile to the Facebook did it through disinformation theory. I mean, you can go back to what I said then. I never thought there was evidence that Russian disinformation or ads or something on Facebook.
He's totally full of shit about this.
I know.
The election, which I still think is true. The Russia stuff, I always thought that was worth investigating. I mean, I guess people can debate whether or not it got too much, and it definitely became a Deus ex machina for liberals.
Deus ex machina.
I never believed that Russia had won the election for him, and I don't think
he
I ever
doesn't
said
know what that word means.
That
by the way,
I did believe that. I definitely didn't believe Facebook had the idea that he was possibly compromised, or that people around him were.
He meant fait accompli.
I don't think was or is, by the way, crazy. I think that the network of
Anyway, that's basically it. No, and what he means by Deus ex machina is that that liberals were hoping that the Mueller investigation would be maybe an unnatural plot intervention that would rescue them from the catastrophe of the Trump administration. But out of that whole thing, the thing that's just most amazing is Ben Smith kind of the barely perceptible smile on his face as he talks about, I have some regrets about publishing the dossier, because that was the whole thing stemmed from that one creepy little moment, right? Where
would the American establishment and the American population have reacted to Russia and ultimately the Ukraine-Russian war and all sorts of other things, like cutting off diplomatic relations with Putin before that war started? In the same way, had the well not been poisoned, this used to be a point of my old Princeton professor, Stephen Cohen, that
our mutual friend,
that they were wrecking U.S.-Russian relations over something that wasn't true, and that could have consequences up to and including World War III. Talk about strawberries rotting in the fields. If they want to start thinking about, second and third order effects of what they just thought was a big joke, one of them could have included a war. Now, let's set that aside. They just admitted to a set of motivations that is actually pretty damning. Had they not been laughing about it,
it's incredible. Yeah.
Had they not been laughing about it, that could have been a tearful confession. They said the Democratic Party and basically our readership,
audiences.
They said our audience was was so in denial about Trump's ability to win. You know why they were in denial? Because you misled them the whole time about his likelihood of winning.
Right, exactly.
Your fucking fake polls and your thought that if everybody agrees between certain streets in New York that something's going to happen, it's going to happen, caused America to be unprepared for reality. You then, instead of saying, we kind of got it wrong in all the predictions that we made and all the editorials we wrote about this being impossible, let's feed our audience a conspiracy theory about why what we didn't prepare them for actually happened.
Yeah, and let's go along with it, even though we personally have reservations, which
Right,
of course,
well-
I believe Ben about that. By the way, I don't believe Ezra. Ezra's all over the place talking about how he thinks collusion is real and everything, whereas Ben Smith from the start basically said this story's out there, it's in the ether, and it needs
because we're exactly where we put it, where we and Peter Strzok or whatever, and all the other people at, remember what was the name of the influence shop?
Fusion GPS.
Yeah, we and everybody from Fusion GPS to certain Republican operatives, I think Paul
John
Singer, and so on. It's in the ether, dude, because we just spent like millions of dollars putting it there.
Right, but the crucial moment in the entire thing was BuzzFeed publishing it, because the real news organizations couldn't do it.
Sure.
Fusion GPS invited all of the other ABC, NBC, CNN. They gave them a group presentation about what was in the Steele documents, and those guys, and they were all guys if I remember correctly, they chased that story, could not verify anything, and then because they still had a shred of something at the time, couldn't publish it. Now,
no, dude, they were just waiting for the pyramid to operate as it's supposed to.
I see.
Let me give you the high school allegory. New guy comes to school, okay? He's kind of good looking, but he kind of comes from the other side of the tracks, and he talks funny, and he's from a part of the country that is suspicious at that high school, at that very gold-plated suburban high school. So the girls get together and say, I'd like to date him. But in order for me to date him, a slightly less popular girl is going to have to date him first. In other words, we're going to have to render him acceptable in order for us, the super picky people at New York Times, and we can pick up on it once you have done the dirty work of accrediting it, because we can cast it not just as a story that we believe, but as a story that others believe. In other words, it's not like I'm attracted to him. It's just that, like, look, Jenny really likes him, and I hear he's kind of cool.
Right. And that's exactly the role that BuzzFeed played, was being that middleman.
And now they've dispensed with them. Where's BuzzFeed? Where goeth BuzzFeed now?
Right. Wait, is that Shakespeare?
Well, I don't know. It sounds like if you say goeth,
Right.
people immediately think that. But what I'm saying is there were these, in the earlier stages of internet journalism, these kind of crap shops.
That's what he called it, a slightly fringy place.
Right. But their job, if people understand the concept of the Overton window, which is the window whose openness measures what can be acceptably discussed, their job was to crack it open a little bit so that the New York Times didn't have to get their hands dirty.
Yes,
and Jake Tapper, which is the actual sequence of events in this case, in the Russiagate case, can now report about it on CNN as though he didn't already know and already kind of think it was bullshit.
Right. Although Jake allegedly got mad at Ben for publishing that. We can leave everybody to their own.
And Trump's mad at Elon, and there's nothing like a fake fight to use to extricate yourself from a situation with
Right.
your, integrity intact.
But you're exactly right about that role that the internet played. I mean, I think we've talked about this before, but there was what I thought was like a really important moment when there was a debate between George Bush and John Kerry, I think it was. And remember, Bush had like a lump under his suit, and there was a theory that was going around on the internet that it was a transmitter and that people were feeding him answers during the debate. Now, there was no proof for it, but it
was the early version of Kamala's earring,
right?
Alleged earring microphone.
Yeah, exactly. Some site did a story on it, and then the New York Times did a column A1 story about the meta phenomenon of people talking about it. Right.
Well, that's how they launder the Luigi story. They're not like, we're not saying it's kind of interesting and maybe even acceptable for good-looking Ivy League grads to shoot down executives in cold blood, but other people are, and we're just reporting on the phenomena.
We're just we're reporting the controversy. Isn't that what we call it? Right.
See, what people don't understand outside of our business is that any one time there is a plethora of juicy rumors that you can choose from to pretty much, if you want to, go after any political figure above a certain line. If you decide you're going to lower your truth standards for one of them because it's so important to go after that person, you need an intermediary to bring you the stuff. And that technique was used over and over. Right now, Matt, if I made a list of 10 rumors I've heard in the last 2 weeks, I could get rid of Donald Trump, get rid of Pete Buttigieg, get rid of Kamala ever having a comeback, get rid of, Marco Rubio, etc. If one of those things becomes so important to you and all my colleagues, and all I have to do is say, there's a buzzcock organization that, got some of this stuff. And I won't say that it's true, but I can start reporting it as a rumor that's really concerning people. Voila.
And it was amazing to see the way, if you go back and look, the rationalizations, like the Columbia Journalism Review did a whole thing about how Ben Smith was right to publish it. And there were, the Guardian was talking about how, well, once he published it, what are we going to do? Not cover a story that was lighting up the internet?
Especially that one that involves the former British super spy, Christopher Steele.
Right, exactly.
They also burnished the reputations of the characters involved such that whether they were telling the truth or not, they were people who were very familiar with lies and seeing through them and counterintelligence. So their very jobs and past roles made this more credible than it would be otherwise. Now we found out the dude was being paid.
Well, right. Yes, he was being paid. And that should have been the end of the story, right? When they found out where the checks were coming from. But before that, you're right. They polished them apples. Like, I mean, the New York Times, I'm sorry, not the New York Times, the New Yorker did that, enormous classic New Yorker ball washing profile of
polishing, I would call it.
Yeah, exactly. The real life George Smiley, man of the shadows. That stuff just writes itself. I mean, I'm sure, Walter, you could have written it in your sleep that whole thing.
You see, everybody who gets contrary to a hyper meta narrative or a mega narrative, in journalism, they wish they could go along it, but certain things about their life experience or their particular set of acumens makes it impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So early on in the Russiagate story, and I won't be specific, a big story came out around the time of the Republican convention, a long story about Russian corrupt banking practices and Trump's supposed involvement in them. I happened to know the people involved with the story, and I knew what their writing styles were, and I knew what their reporting habits were. And when I read this story, I went, wait a second. This person didn't write this without help. I recognize style. I recognize habitual manners of expression. And this is weird. Then when they told me Christopher Steele was a super spy, the screenwriter in me looked at him and go, if he was a super spy, he wouldn't have hair like that. Hair that made you
know him either.
Yes, hair that made you a super spy in 1974. And actually makes him incredibly conspicuous and look like a wash-up wannabe super spy who needs money, which is what he turned out to be.
Right.
In other words, there were so many jumps that I couldn't get over that involved my just personal truth detecting equipment. But I went to the people who got over all of them. How are they doing it?
Yeah. I mean, I remember.
Why are they doing it?
Why are they doing it? But see, Walter, that stuff threw me for a long time. I thought it had to be me, right? So when the Steele thing came out, I remember reading that and thinking, this is so cheesily written, right? It could not possibly be the product of actual real work. Right, it was so badly done.
If he's a British super spy, like say John le Carré writes about, or le Carré kind of was just a little bit at one point in actuality, then
or
why
Graham
can't
Greene? Yeah.
Then why can't he write English?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're all very literate.
Yeah.
So all these things didn't scan, and yet it was forced down our throats over and over again. And if you didn't go for it, boy, there was really something wrong with you. You were actively turning your a blind eye to something obvious. And now those same folks are talking about
still
other
employed
things
for some reason.
Yeah, but you heard Klein, and the reason all this is still relevant is because Klein, because of something Klein just said. So Trump, it was legitimate to investigate the aura of corruption around Trump because he really does have one. The connections then were about Russia. Now it's about crypto, right? So it's just another version of the same story. They're leaving stuff out. They're burnishing other things, and it makes it just very difficult to sort out what you're looking at, unless you get to do a ground level report about something, which I guess is the next thing. But at the same time, there are going to be document dumps coming out now. I know from at least one agency in the next couple of weeks, so that's going to be interesting. But people are going to demand that we not cover that and that we look at something something critical of the administration. But
Newark Airport breaking down.
Well, right, that's another story. There was a whole panoply of these. The new administration has made us unsafe stories. There were segments on all the cable networks about it. And then it turns out, there's another version of the story where these are pre-existing problems. There was, who was it? Was it a union official at Newark Airport who talked about this?
So Matt, my job at this stage in my career is to pull back the curtain slightly on things that I participated in and things that I notice as a result, but which aren't exactly news stories. Your job is not to discredit yourself as a fact-based reporter. My job is not to discredit myself as a part-time novelist. Okay. So, dude, unless I am creative in a reality-based way, I'm not fulfilling my brand expectations.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And being the proper captive of whatever tiny audience I've developed. When I was in Washington for the inauguration, did it happen on Monday or Tuesday? I can't remember.
Monday.
Well, how many days later was there a terrible, tragic plane crash where a helicopter hit an airliner at Washington Reagan and caused a hellacious and violent, horrible catastrophe? The night it happened, I was sitting at a kind of power bar in Washington near the White House, and it was later in the evening, and an investigator who had gone down and looked for bodies in the water came in and sat next to me. Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
At the same time, almost instantly, that became a story about how Donald Trump, within a few days of his inauguration, had so ruined the air traffic control system of America that this had happened.
Yep. And then there was another version of the story that circulated in a different direction, that placed the blame on some other factors, but
just this week, I mean, we're just reporting on the phenomena, not the actuality. So give us an asterisk and an out. Just last week, it came out supposedly because of cockpit recordings that the male experienced pilot in the helicopter, or at least the sidekick or co-pilot, was warning the new potentially DEI boosted female pilot, pull up, change course, and she ignored him. Thus, it becomes a story for the right about the terrible damage to our society and infrastructure of DEI. While on the left, it becomes a story about Donald Trump somehow miraculously ruining the air traffic control system within days of inauguration. Now we have both sides have their red meat, okay? Both sides have a narrative that completely confirms their priors about politics, society, gender, and everything else. And they just battle it out, causing further disintegration of the American polity as every story develops a Trump and an anti-Trump valence, or a DEI and an anti-DEI valence. After a while, I look at that phenomena and I go, wait, does someone want us disagreeing about every fucking thing? About why there aren't strawberries in the store? About, everybody who gets pulled over at a airport, every plane crash now has a political explanation. It actually has two. One that keeps us totally at each other's throats. When I look back as a novelist at that, I go, somebody wants to create ceaseless and insuperable conflict at every level over every trigger issue in America, such that what?
Yeah.
Why?
Even when the sensible thing would be to not politicize any angle of that story, right?
It's one thing when there's always one narrative that's the prestige narrative, but it's another thing altogether when there are always two narratives.
Right.
Trump was right. DEI sucks. It gets people killed in planes. Trump fired people and almost instantly hollowed out our air traffic control system. And when each of these narratives has a constituency and a bunch of facts that it can bring about and has star reporters who can do it, me, the referee, sits back and goes like, why is every fight so suspenseful?
Well,
could this be the league at work wanting all fights to attract an audience?
Yeah. Well, I think you got your answer, right? And in turn, and that's one of the reasons why the politicians that tend to get the most limelight are the most combative and irrational and crazy in American politics. And speaking of which, we can't get into it tonight because we're already over. But Jasmine Crockett is throwing her hat in the ring as the head of to take Jerry Connolly's old job at the as the ranking member of the Oversight Committee. And that could actually happen, and that would be a wild development in American politics because I think she's already planning to have some real fun with that endeavor. So we'll see what happens.
Another polarizing event around race.
Talk about polarizing. Yeah,
around
exactly.
race, gender, competency, politics in general. Trump. In other words, why do they keep pulling out these events? People discovered the metaphor called kayfabe of semi-scripted or actually wholly scripted wrestling events being the best way to see American politics.
Totally. Yep.
And I have my own version of that. It's a little higher end for the audience that expects more from my education level. But I will say, when everything starts becoming a prize match between repulsive adversaries who have the same arguments, about why the other guy's a fucking slob and why I'm the greatest, you do wonder if the league is profiting at the expense of the audience.
Yeah, and there are some aspects of the Trump experience that are just so WWE that it, like the whole Pope post that he did on Truth Social. I mean, that's like the Scott Hall walkout for wrestling fans. It's like it's an amazing thing. But
I saw wrestling. A figure once do a TED talk in which he came out and without telling the audience what he was doing, he spent 3 minutes insulting them and pushing their buttons in the way that prize fighters will. And I say to all you Roman Catholics, your Pope is the, whatever. Anyway, he did this with the TED Talk audience. And then suddenly he let us in on the joke. And he said, I've gotten you all mad. I've gotten you all intensely interested. I've gotten you all juiced for the fight. And all it took was a bunch of insults. And some people...
Was that Eric Bischoff, probably? Go ahead.
I can't remember his name. But some people advanced the thesis that Trump is fit for the presidency because it was kayfabe before he came along, but at a lower level. So a master of kayfabe came in and owns the stadium. They said it was fake before, but we're just going to bring in the genius of fake, and he will deconstruct the system by countering it in ways that will expose it.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons you're having this the revolt of false modesty and wounded integrity from the political system after it's been exposed as basically cheap wrestling hackery. That's I think that's really what's happening. But anyway, interesting stuff, and I continue to be amazed by how interesting and revelatory and also just wildly funny this administration is. I know I'm not supposed to laugh this hard at things that are serious, but it really is.
As long as there are Ezra Kleins and Ben Smiths in the world, I'm going to be me, because there's a lot of them and there aren't that many me.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But I will say this. The mixture of this kind of spectacle, this kind of manipulation, this kind of scripted and unscripted provocation with events of real consequence is what makes this really interesting. Oh, wait, they might be ending an actual war at the same time memes about being elected Pope are going on. Oh, they're going to stop a biowarfare program that's been going on for decades. It actually threatened to maybe fuck up the entire globe and did to some extent. On the same day, people are freaking out about strawberry pickers. That is the unsettling part, or the truly novel part of the Trump experience, which is that it combines real, or apparently real, events of some consequence and import, and of a kind that didn't happen for decades, with this circus.
Yeah. I'm becoming less and less interested in the circus and more interested in those things that you're talking about.
Yeah.
One thing to part with we talked about Russiagate just briefly. An ethics complaint has surfaced about Adam Schiff. It's an old story. It was reported in CNN a couple of years ago. He's obviously a California politician. You're seeing that's him on election day with an "I voted" sticker in front of his permanent residence in Maryland. So that's a fun story that has legs. That's about to get uglier again. So,
what I can tell our audience that I hope will keep you interested in us is that any one time, Matt and I, as I sort of hinted earlier, are being flooded with potential stories and rumors and so on, some of which are kind of legitimate probably, and some of which are bullshit. I can tell you things will not get less interesting. That I can report with confidence. There
may or may not be something coming down the pipe.
Yes.
All right, everybody. Thanks for hanging out. Walter, thank you, and we will see you again soon.
See you then.